Hey, what's going on, everybody? What's happening? It is Friday, July the 26th, 2024, 1:14 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Dave McCrae, coming to you live from the Voiceman Studios in Toronto, Canada, and this is episode 273 of McRae Live. And we're talking Halloween and Irwin Yablans today on the show. Let's do it again! Happy belated happy belated 90th birthday to Irwin Yablans, who turned 90 yesterday. Irwin Yablans, you know, arguably the most important figure in the history of Halloween, and he doesn't get talked about enough. He doesn't get the credit he deserves, and we're going to talk about it here today on the show. Yes, that's what we're going to do. Welcome, everybody, to episode 273 of McRae Live. My name is Dave McCrae. Thank you for joining me here on this Friday afternoon. I hope your week has gone well, and I hope you are getting ready and excited for the weekend. So on this episode, I wanted to talk about Irwin Yablans and his role, his pivotal role, his integral role into the creation of Halloween. And Irwin Yablans, in my opinion, doesn't get enough credit and doesn't get the recognition by and large across the Halloween fandom space that he deserves. The one that usually gets talked about and actually has been labeled the Godfather of Halloween is Mustafa Akkad. And fair enough. I understand why Mustafa Akkad has been given the title of the Godfather of Halloween. He even has a plaque dedicated to him under a bench. Is it under a bench? I think it's under a bench across the street from the Strode House in South Pasadena. If you just go across the street where the public library is, the Pasadena Public Library, there's a little plaque on the ground that is dedicated to the Godfather of Halloween. It says on the plaque, the Godfather of Halloween, Mustafa Akkad. And this is not a show and an episode to take anything away from Mustafa Akkad. I'm not saying that he is not an important figure. I'm not saying he is not integral to the Halloween franchise and you know, arguably where the Halloween franchise went, the good, the bad, and the ugly. When you are with something long enough, you tend to be responsible for many things along the way. But in actuality, when I think of the term Godfather, and maybe I'm taking it a little too literally, because if you follow me for any length of time, you know that I've touched on this channel before too. I believe that, terms like the GOAT, right? The greatest of all time, legendary, iconic, these terms are loosely tossed around now. They really don't have much meaning. Iconic, legendary, and GOAT now just kind of means extremely popular, well-known, well-liked, and that doesn't mean that if you're extremely popular, if you're extremely well-liked and you're the hot new thing, that doesn't mean you're any of those three things or you ever will be any of those three things. For me, those terms, the greatest of all time, and listen, it can be subjective as well, although in sports, you can certainly measure it with stats and all that kind of stuff. But greatest of all time, legendary, iconic should be reserved for the creme de la creme, the peak, the top of the mountain, And Godfather in this context, in terms of Halloween, is probably the same kind of thing. Mustafa Akkad was the one constant through all of the Halloween films, right up until Halloween Resurrection. Unfortunately, him and his daughter, I believe, passed away in a terrorist attack in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. And so obviously he was not a part of the Rob Zombie films and anything moving forward. But he was the one constant. His name was always there. Mustafa Akkad presents. Mustafa Akkad presents. Mustafa Akkad presents. Well after, Irwin Yablans was long gone, John Carpenter and Jamie Lee Curtis, were long gone. There he was, Mustafa Akkad presents. He was integral for keeping it going, right? And so I do understand why the why the title was bestowed upon him. I get it, but at the end of the day, when I think of Godfather, when I think of, I don't think anybody would argue that the Godfather of Star Wars is George Lucas. He just came to your head right now, right? Because he was integral for the creation of the idea, for the creation of, everything about it, pitching it to, the studios, not giving up on it, spearheading the project. He was integral to it. And so when I think of the Godfather of Halloween, I understand why Irwin Yablans, why Mustafa Akkad has been given that title. But for me, I don't think he is. I think he's an important figure. Absolutely. Of course, he's an important figure. But when I think of the Godfather of Halloween, if we want to give that title to anybody, it's not John Carpenter. It's Irwin Yablans. Irwin Yablans is the Godfather of Halloween. It was his idea. And a lot of what we know about that original film came from Irwin Yablans, including the idea to hire Donald Pleasence. Because I believe it was Carpenter I think it was Carpenter was leaning towards Christopher Lee. And Irwin Yablans thought it would be too much of a Hammer film. He's like, I don't really know. This is the book that, if you are a Halloween fan, if you consider yourself a Halloween fan, right? You pick up those Taking Shape books and all that kind of stuff. This is another must-have. This is another must-have on your shelf. This is Irwin Yablans' book. It's called The Man Who Created Halloween. Now, keep in mind that although Halloween is all over the cover, you get a nice film strip here, a lot of Halloween in there, and, it's very Halloween. That is because that is what he is most known for, and arguably his biggest project ever. But please understand that the whole book isn't about Halloween, but that shouldn't matter to you. It shouldn't matter. It goes through his entire history of his life and his experience in the film industry. Right? Leading up to the creation of Halloween. And so I picked this book up at the 40th anniversary convention when I interviewed Irwin Yablans, when I met him there. And he signed it for me, which is very nice. He signed it. There you go. Very cool to have. Oh, wait. Oh, there we go. To Dave, the voice man, Irwin Yablans. Very nice indeed. And so please understand that it isn't all about Halloween. It's about his life, his family, the film industry. But it's a great read. And it's an important read because it gives you the backstory and the content. Like, we've all kind of heard sound bites about it. Carpenter has talked about it. If you've watched any documentaries on Halloween, Irwin will probably pop up somewhere in there, and you'll get like 20, 30-second sound bites from time to time, him honing in on certain stuff. But there's nuance in here, right? There's a lot of nuance and things that you read and you go, oh, it's expanded on a bit. There's a little more context to it. And yes, Mustafa Akkad, of course, is in here, and it's incredible. He's an integral figure. But Mustafa Akkad didn't come up with the idea for Halloween. It wasn't his idea. And some people have tried to make the argument, well, yes, but he was the financer. Well, yeah, but if Mustafa Akkad had turned it down, Irwin would have gone somewhere else. Right? I mean, it's not like if it was ride or die with Akkad. He went to Akkad because he had a relationship with Akkad because I believe Irwin had helped to distribute his film, The Message. If I'm not mistaken, it's in here. I've highlighted things. So they had a working relationship. It makes sense. Hey, I want to do, I have a new company, Compass International Pictures. I'm going to go to Akkad. That makes sense. But it was the brainchild of Irwin Yablans. I'm just going to read you a couple of things here because it's really cool for those of you that may not know. Now, again, we all know sort of the Cliff Notes version, but there's some cool things in here. Some cool little things that expand on it a little bit. And for instance, this is chapter 13. He's talking about being on the flight coming home. As I settled back in first class comfort for the flight back to Los Angeles, my mind was whirling. I was determined to come up with an idea for our first production. Our first production, meaning his company, Compass International. It would have to be a horror film. That I was certain. Since childhood, I had gravitated to the genre. The macabre fascinated me. But there were other practical reasons for choosing that path. Responses to fright are immediate and visceral. I like to use the example of how people react to the different plots or stories. Tell a joke to 3 people. One may howl with laughter while the other simply smiles. The third person may miss the humor altogether. A sad tale may thus elicit tears from one and no emotion from the other two. Much of the response in both cases is subjective and reliant on their perceptions of subtleties that my audience members, it's kind of dark in here, may not all detect or not respond to equally. However, if I were to come up from behind the same unsuspecting 3 and suddenly scream, their reactions would be totally predictable. In every case, they shriek in surprise and fear. So he's thinking about these things, as he's on the plane, right? He's on a plane. He's on a first class flight back from overseas to LA. He knew that he wanted to make a horror film. And this is where it came to be. In every case, I already read that. In the case of masterpieces like Hitchcock's Psycho and Friedkin's The Exorcist, the technique can be exquisite. As the plane winged over the blackness below, I pondered how I could emulate that successful formula for a movie that Carpenter might want to direct for Compass as a follow-up to Assault on Precinct 13. Because originally Assault on Precinct 13 was called The Siege. Right? Of course, they changed the title to it. And Michael Myers was the distributor of that, right? That was the name of the distributor for Assault. Irwin Yablans had already met Carpenter. They were working together on that. And he wanted to work with him again because he thought he was a great talent. And he wanted to come up with a vehicle for Carpenter. But it was Irwin Yablans that wanted to do a horror film, right? It's fascinating. The idea came to me that a movie about babysitters in jeopardy could be interesting. I reasoned that everyone had either been a babysitter, hired one, or at the very least, been a baby. That's true. We've all been a baby. It all flowed effortlessly. In the darkness of that first-class cabin, I thought, let's set the story on one night and one location to help control the budget. Both Psycho and The Exorcist had benefited from the claustrophobic atmospheres, kind of like a haunted house, if you will. Suddenly, the eureka moment hit me. The light bulb above my head lit up. Why not set the movie on the night that celebrates fright? Halloween. Hell, why not call the movie Halloween? So Irwin Yablans comes up with the idea to do a low-budget horror movie that can be in the spirit of like a Psycho or, The Exorcist, like that kind of creepy, eerie, atmospheric thing. He suddenly thinks, well, you know what? Why don't we do it about babysitters? Okay. So he's got the premise down, not the story, because that was written by Carpenter and Hill. but he's got the premise. Let's do it about babysitters, because it's not so much now, of course, but certainly back in the 70s, right? That was a big thing. It was a huge thing. Huge, right? Babysitters, teenagers, vulnerability. Yeah. He comes up with the idea to set it on Halloween, and he comes up with the idea to call it Halloween. So he comes up with the idea to do a low-budget horror movie. He comes up with the premise that it's going to be about babysitters. He comes up with the idea to set the movie on Halloween. And he thinks, well, fuck, why don't we just call it Halloween? That's huge. And by the way, according to Irwin Yablans, and he's told me this, it was never going to be called The Babysitter Murders. He doesn't even know where the hell that came from. So that's a strange, unusual kind of myth, I guess, that just caught on somewhere along the lines. Because he said he knew immediately. Like on that flight, he knew he wanted to call it Halloween. So now it goes on because he wasn't sure if there was ever a movie before that was called that, right? Like he goes on to say, certainly with a title like Halloween, you would think that would have been used before. But it hadn't. And he was shocked by that. So it goes on, and he talks about how he gets home. Let me just put the bookmark back in there if I want to reference something. He talks about how, he gets home. He's really amped. He's excited. He kisses his wife. He goes to bed. The next day, he calls John Carpenter and says, can we meet for lunch? He's like, yeah, I've got a project. I think I've got a project for you. How do you think about this? Horror movie, low budget, Halloween babysitters. Apparently, according to Irwin, he was excited about it. They met for lunch. Carpenter got it immediately. He understood it. And Irwin said, do you think you can make this for about $300,000? And Carpenter said, yes, I can. And his only request, as we know, was to have his name above the title, which Irwin said was was a pretty ballsy move for a nobody director. But he believed in him so much, and he thought the risk was relatively low, that he said, okay, we'll see if we can, make that work. And I think Carpenter was paid $10,000 to write, direct, and score the film, which according to Irwin was extremely low, even for that time. But again, he said, I think we agreed to like 10% of the profits or something, but nobody thought it was going to go on to become the highest grossing independent horror movie in motion picture history. Nobody thought that. That wasn't the goal. It's not like what, Irwin wanted to change the face of cinema. He just was inspired by movies like Psycho and, The Exorcist and things like that. And for the most part, 70s horror was starting to get a little more exploitative and splatter and things like that. And he wanted to do something in the vein of more of a traditional kind of, again, that theater of the mind, right? And so, but he didn't think this was going to go on to become what it became. But anyway, so they went to, he goes on to talk about how Carpenter said, yes, as long as my girlfriend can help write it for me and produce it, which was Deborah Hill. Irwin agreed. Okay. They thought they had a great premise. They're excited. They need to get the funding. So naturally, because of the relationship that Irwin had with Mustafa, Irwin, he's like, you can see the groundwork he's doing here just by me telling you what he's written in the book and sort of, he's thought of this, he's doing this, he's making this, he's thinking, these phone calls, he's checking at work to see if the title never been used, hasn't been used. That's great. Okay. Halloween. This is amazing. Let's do this. He's doing the boots on the groundwork and legwork that a producer does. And so he calls Mustafa Akkad and says, hey, because they have a relationship. Here's what I'm thinking here, blah, 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 blah. Mustafa didn't quite get it, didn't quite understand it, because Irwin says, Halloween is, especially at that time, was really more of a North American, holiday. It wasn't big. And I think it's bigger in certain parts of Europe now, but it certainly is not. It's not like it is here. I mean, it's not like So Mustafa didn't quite get it in the same ways that we would have over here, you know what I mean? So he was like, okay, all right, and he had a meeting with Carpenter and Hill, Mustafa did, and Irwin called, and while they were in the meeting, he says in the book, he calls and Mustafa picks up and Mustafa's like, I'm not really, what's this about, or what's this, whatever. And Irwin said, I played into Mustafa's ego. And I said to him, oh, well, listen, you know what, if you think it's too much, that's okay. We don't have to do it. I can go, if it's too much. And he's like, no, it's not too much. No. So he said he played into his ego because he knew, because obviously they had a relationship. So Irwin knew Mustafa pretty well. And he said, well, listen, if you think 300,000 is too much, I can, and Mustafa, was like, oh, no, I'll because it sort of, I guess, made him feel like he couldn't come through. You know what I mean? It was, Mustafa didn't want that. You know what I mean? But he didn't understand it. Mustafa didn't understand. It was only till later that Mustafa Akkad understood how profitable that Halloween could be, right? But at that moment, with the inception of Halloween, with its inception, its creation, Mustafa Akkad didn't understand what the fuck was going on. He didn't really get it. He just understood the enthusiasm from Carpenter and Hill, understood the enthusiasm from Irwin, and believed, because of, okay, well, hey, look, okay, you know what? Hey, here you go, right? Okay, if you think this is going to work, and they sold it really well. Carpenter and Hill sold it really well, and the idea, right? That pitch, Irwin pitched it really well, right? And obviously there's more details in the book all about that, but it's fascinating to read those things that you don't normally hear about, because Mustafa Akkad, and again, I'm not saying he's not important. I'm not taking anything away from his contribution and his legacy and his importance to Halloween. But when it comes to the inception and the creation of Halloween, that really has nothing to do with Mustafa Akkad and everything to do with Irwin Yablans and not anything to do with John Carpenter. And so, it's a fascinating thing that I think is important. And because it was Irwin Yablans' 90th birthday yesterday, big happy birthday to Irwin Yablans, I think it's important that we do a show like this and tip our hat to who I believe is the true godfather of Halloween, and that is Irwin Yablans. And so we know that he came up with the idea. He wanted to do a low budget horror movie, so he came up with the idea to do that. He came up with the idea for the premise about babysitters. He came up with the idea that it would take place on Halloween. He came up with the idea that it would be called Halloween. He also came up with the idea for the movie poster's key art, the knife and the fist and the pumpkin. That was Irwin Yablans as well. Right? So you got that. He came up with the idea to hire Donald Pleasance. There's that, right? And so it's like, fuck, this is, that's a lot coming from Irwin Yablans. That's not coming from John Carpenter. That's not coming from Mustafa Akkad. That's not coming from Deborah Hill, right? That's coming from Irwin Yablans, because it was his company. Compass International Pictures was Irwin Yablans' company, and he was excited, and so he's doing all that legwork and that passion. And if you've never met him, he's a talker, and he's smooth, and he's witty, and he's charming, and he absolutely knows how to communicate effectively to people and pitch his idea and his passion, and so it was just it's remarkable how much comes from him as well. Now, the idea to hire Jamie Lee Curtis, I believe, was a John Carpenter idea because of Psycho and Janet Leigh. And Irwin totally bought into it. And then Irwin took that as the producer. And I believe he sent out a press release to the trades, I believe, at that time. I believe so. It's in the book, where he took a photo of Janet Leigh screaming and a picture of Jamie Lee Curtis. This is way back then. And sort of like an announcement about this new production company, Compass International Pictures, is going to be doing their first movie. It's going to be, Halloween. And there's like that image. I mean, he circulated that, nationwide, and it got a lot of steam and a lot of buzz. And so, because he knew not only did Carpenter know the value, of course, of hiring Janet Leigh, Irwin Yablans as a producer knew what to do with that. Right? He looked at that and said, I can exploit this in a good way, in the best way possible, not in a negative way, right? But you go, oh my God, I got to use this, right? And so he did a lot of work, a lot of boots on the ground, a lot of work to make that a reality. Now, the story, right? There's the premise, which is this is about babysitters on Halloween night. The movie's called Halloween. There's an evil that stalks them or whatever it was. That all comes from Irwin Yablans. Now, the actual story itself, right? The 3 acts and the characters. And okay, so we're going about this. And it's a guy escapes from a mental institution. Is Michael. All that is Carpenter and Hill, of course. And you have to give credit where credit is due. But I just don't think Irwin Yablans gets enough credit. Now, unfortunately, the relationship between Irwin and Carpenter soured in the early 80s, which is why Carpenter and Irwin, I don't even think speak to this day. And it could also be because, Irwin, shortly after he produced Halloween 2, Tourist Trap, was he part of The Fog? I can't remember. I don't think he was. But shortly after those movies, somewhere in the early 80s, I believe Irwin left the business, if I'm not mistaken. I think so. And there was a lot of animosity between, Irwin and Carpenter because of the contract that, Carpenter signed, and there was it's a whole thing. It's in the book. Is it in the book? No, it might not be in the book, actually. But you can certainly look this up. It's a whole thing. And so there was a lot of sour grapes and a lot of animosity. And so naturally, because Irwin left the business, I believe, in the early 80s, or somewhere in the 80s, he was never a part of any of the other Halloween films, right? And because John Carpenter came up with the characters and Deborah Hill, right? You will always see John Carpenter and Deborah Hill's names in every Halloween movie. I don't believe you necessarily see Irwin Yablans, right? So, you'll always see, based on the characters created by, and it is true. Irwin Yablans didn't create Laurie Strode, didn't create, Michael Myers or Dr. Loomis. That all does come from Carpenter and Hill. So their names have always been, a part of every Halloween film. And so their spirit has always been there. And you have to give credit where credit is due. And you absolutely give credit to Carpenter and Hill where it is. And to Mustafa Akkad for keeping all those, if it wasn't for Mustafa Akkad, Halloween may have died a miserable, not a miserable death, but they may have died a death in the early 80s, and there never would have been another Halloween film ever again, which may not have been a bad idea. But certainly Mustafa Akkad is the one that is responsible, simply because they were profitable. Some more profitable than others, but simply because they did make some money. And he didn't ultimately care about the product, I would say. He didn't not care at all, but he certainly wasn't thinking like Irwin Yablans was. Irwin Yablans has made it very clear, and he's made it very clear to me that I haven't seen any, it was about this. It was supposed to be this. This is what it was. It was this. It's not that, it's all this stuff going on, all this kind of crazy stuff. I remember, and even Halloween 18, he wasn't really a big fan of Halloween 18 either. Again, it's not, he doesn't mean that in a disrespectful way. He just means that the thing that I created, the idea that I came up with, is so far removed, like what it is now is so far removed from what I want, what the whole point of it was. So, he says, and of course he probably, does he still, I don't know for sure, but he may still get some cuts in there. I believe there was some sort of negotiation with the David Gordon Green trilogy, if I'm not mistaken. So certainly he is still reaping the benefits, I believe, on some level. I'm not entirely sure, but so he should. I mean, he is the creator of it after all. I mean, again, for all intents and purposes, and again, don't quote me on this. I'm not 100% sure on what his financial, if he had anything from the David, I believe he did, but I don't know how much or what, or, how that all worked, because obviously I'm not privy to the details of that, but I do know that he was at the premiere, the Halloween 18 premiere. He was there on the red carpet. I don't think he had seen Jamie Lee Curtis in a long time. They had invited him, which was very nice of them to do. I don't know if he spoke to Carpenter or not. I have no idea. There's no pictures of him and Carpenter. There's pictures of him and Curtis, but there's no pictures of him and Carpenter. So I doubt that they will ever talk again. But I just wanted to jump on and talk about this because, again, I don't think Irwin Yablans gets enough credit. When you think that everything from the name Halloween to set it on Halloween to be about babysitters and some sort of evil, after them, to do a low budget horror movie like Psycho in that sort of vein, to hire Donald Pleasance, the movie poster key art. I mean, why are we not talking about him? Well, why are we not giving him the credit he deserves? And he just turned 90 yesterday. I mean, that's a rhetorical question because I do understand why. But I think it's important that we should celebrate his contribution because without Irwin Yablans, there would be no Halloween. You could say, but without Mustafa Akkad, there would be no Halloween. No, that's not true because Irwin would have likely have just taken it elsewhere. He just would have he would have looked for another financer. It's his production company. If Mustafa wasn't going to fund it, then I'll find somebody else who will fund it. So there is absolutely an argument to be made that there may still have been, very likely, Halloween would have still come to fruition. But without Irwin Yablans, if he wasn't on that plane really jazzed about, I think he was coming from the festival or something where Assault on Precinct 13 was playing. I think, I got to brush up on it. But if he wasn't jazzed about Carpenter and Assault and his new company and wanting to do something with his new company, if he wasn't, I mean, that's not to say that there never ever would have been a movie ever called Halloween. I'm just saying that Halloween as we know it today, that first movie, which kicked off, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that may never have happened if it wasn't for Irwin Yablans. You may still have got a movie eventually called Halloween that may or may not have been coming from Irwin. It may have been, some other film called Halloween about, I don't know, creepy skeletons that kill kids or something. Like, who knows? Like, you may still have got a movie called Halloween, but you likely wouldn't have gotten that movie called Halloween. So happy birthday to Irwin Yablans. Again, his birthday was yesterday. He turned 90 years old yesterday. And in my opinion, the true godfather of Halloween, Irwin Yablans. So let's jump over to the chat room and see what all you are saying, and let's talk about this. I'd be curious to know your thoughts on all this. I know a couple super chats came in. Eddie Chase sends in $10. Thanks, Eddie. Said, did you borrow inspired by anything style wise from OG Black Christmas, lighting, mood, etc. when doing the Billy film? Anything you wanted to make better? Also, director went to my alma mater, University of Miami. Bob Clark did? That's really cool. Rest in peace, Bob Clark. Absolutely, for sure. I mean, it is a direct sequel to the original Black Christmas, and we wanted our film to feel like it lived and breathed in the same universe, in the same type, tone, style, all that kind of stuff. So, yes. Now, we wanted to, it's our vision of it, and we wanted to, it was all about emulating the tone and the style for a modern audience to the point where it feels like it lives and breathes in the same universe. That's very important. It feels like a natural extension in tone, in pacing, in style, the kind of horror movie it is. It would be out of character to create a movie that had a lot of fast edits, a lot of blood, a lot of gore. It's not the same style. So yes, the short answer is yes, definitely. We took inspiration for sure, but we also made it our own because we obviously have our own vision of how we want to stylize that and mold that and shape that. So, but yes, that is true for sure. It absolutely was an inspiration. It had to be. Black Christmas '05. There are people that still, I still see these comments from time to time, people watching It's Me, Billy, and making a remark about how we obviously tipped our hat to the original film, but we also tipped our hat to the '06 Black Christmas. That's not true at all. And the only thing I can think of in It's Me, Billy that makes them think that is the introduction of the character of Agnes. And I say this, it's important for audiences and horror fans to remember that the character of Agnes was not introduced for the first time in Black Xmas in 2006 as Billy's sister. That was introduced in the 1974 film. Now, we didn't see Agnes in the 74 film, but you hear Billy mentioning the name Agnes on the phone when he's talking to Jess. I'm paraphrasing, but he's doing his crazy antics and his voices, and he's saying like, Billy, what did you do with the baby? What did you do with Agnes? And Bob Clark, rest in peace, the director of the original film, has said that he always, although it's not explicitly said within the film, he said, I always imagined that Agnes was likely Billy's sister and maybe he abused her and that kind of thing. And that was always out there. So again, the introduction of Agnes as Billy's sister is not a tip of the hat to the '06 film. It is just something that it was a seed that was planted in the original movie that we took inspiration from, like the '06 movie. The '06 film took that same seed and went in one direction. We took that seed and went in another direction. So there's nothing in the film, nothing at all, that we are tipping our hat to the '06 film. It is all the original. Josh McKenna sends in $9.99 and says, I love the video you posted yesterday of Victoria signing the photos. Thanks, man. Appreciate that. Yeah, no, it was a fun day. It was a fun day. It was great. We got together in the morning and, we worked on some ADR for It's Me, Billy Chapter 2. There was some ADR work we had to do. So we did that. And then she signed some of the photos. And then we got together with her boyfriend, Matt, and went out to lunch, this beautiful restaurant, and went out to lunch and hung out there for a few hours. It was a lot of fun. She's such a, and both, it was my first time meeting her boyfriend, and they've been together for years, and he is such a nice man. Very, very nice young man. I approve, Victoria. I approve. Really, really nice guy. Really, really nice guy. And of course, Victoria is just an absolute sweetheart. So to be able to hang out with her and catch up and was a lot of fun. And I showed her a few little things from the movie that I had on my phone. And so she was very excited about that. She thinks it looks great. So she's uber excited because it was the first time she had seen anything from it. So I showed a few little scenes that not the whole film, but just some scenes. And she was thought it looked great and was very excited. So she'll be on the channel. She'll be on the channel once we start to ramp up the marketing. She'll be on the channel here. Within the next couple of months, so, you guys will get to see her and talk to her, but she's awesome. She's just got such an infectious energy and there's just certain people out there that you just love to be around because they just make you feel good, and she's just one of those people. She's just got such infectious energy, uber talented, very friendly. And yeah, I absolutely, am planning on working with her again, because I just, I just enjoy working with her and enjoy the process. I don't know what project that will be yet, but certainly I absolutely would love to work with her again for sure, and she's totally down too. So yeah, no, she's awesome, and I just wanted to share that on social media because it was a fun little video. Thanks, Josh. Josh follows up and says, are you excited for the Olympics? Do you have a favorite event? The Summer Olympics, right? I not really. I wasn't even realize. I forgot that it was the Summer Olympics this year. I don't really have a favorite event. I guess the gymnastics is always cool to watch because it's like, holy shit, how do these flips and all this kind of stuff is always kind of fun. Of course, track is always fun because I'm a runner, so I appreciate that. But I wouldn't say I have a favorite, no. Power Packers 90 sends in a member chat. Thanks, buddy. He says, but Dave, he isn't the Godfather. He's the 100% biological real father of Halloween. Oh, that's true. That's true. That is true. That is true. Love you. Excited for It's Me Billy Chapter 2 trailer. He's the biological father. I see what you're saying. Yeah. But that's not, that would be a weird label to put on. People usually use Godfather, as a means to suggest that this is without this person, right? Without this individual, there would be no whatever this is, right? That's usually how it's used in this context. But if you want to take it literally, you're kind of right. He is the biological father. And you are the father, Maury Povich. My God. Super chat comes in from Brandon Collins. Hey, Brandon Collins. Nice to see you here. I think Bob Clark was flat out lying about this conversation with Carpenter regarding Halloween. Yablans came up with the title and concept. It's bullshit. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Obviously, Bob Clark died in 2007, tragically in California. He was in a car accident with his son. They both were killed. It was a head-on collision. And so the internet, obviously social media was really for all intents and purposes, it was pretty much non-existent. I know Facebook was around. I know YouTube was around. But I'm just saying, compared to now, it wasn't really a thing. And so had Bob Clark been alive today, and where conventions have gone now, how massive, there's a horror convention for every fucking grain of sand on the beach. It's wild now. Conventions and celebrities going to conventions and things like that, and anniversaries. And it would be fascinating if Bob Clark was alive today and in good health. Now, because of where the internet is now, those are the questions that you want to probe, right? Because that interview he did, I believe, was for a 2003 documentary or something, or 2004, something like that. It was a 25th anniversary of Black Christmas or something. It was something like that. So it was the internet, again, for all intents and purposes, was in its relative infancy at that time, in terms of what we know the internet to be today. In the early 2000s, it was, Yahoo and Hotmail and Hotmail chat and Yahoo chat rooms and MSN Messenger. And, there was no YouTube, there was no Facebook, there was no Instagram, no Twitter, no smartphones, it was a very different world. And so that interview where he says that, I agree with you. I don't know. And then I'm surprised somebody hasn't asked Carpenter about it either, unless somebody has, I'm not sure. But it's too bad he's not alive today and in good health, because obviously, I have to be in good health to go to these conventions, because it would be really cool to interview Bob Clark today and ask him about that. You know what I mean? And because the stage is a bit bigger, and what he would say to that. There could be some truth to it. There's likely, I doubt Bob Clark would make it all up and just it's a complete lie. There's probably some truth to it. Him and Carpenter probably knew each other. There was probably a conversation that happened, and not necessarily that, it could have just been, it could have been a scenario where it's just a coincidence. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know. I'm not sure if Bob Clark may not be privy to this he may not know how it really came to be, right? He may not know that. He may have never known Irwin Yablans. He may never have met Irwin Yablans. And so maybe that conversation did happen, and maybe Bob Clark just naturally thought that it came from Carpenter, not realizing that it came from Irwin Yablans. And Carpenter, and who knows how much Bob Clark and Carpenter talked, if they talked at all after that, who knows? So it may be true in the sense of that the conversation did happen, but it's not true that the inspiration came from Bob Clark. It just was, it just was a coincidence, right? But Bob Clark may not know that. He may be like, oh, like if he were alive today, he may be like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought because there was a movie, I just thought Carpenter probably took inspiration from it. I didn't know that. Oh, okay. Well, then that, you know what I mean? Like not everybody knows everybody and everybody's hanging out, right? And so who knows? It's just too bad he's not alive today to be able to probe and get into those nitty gritty nuances a bit more, right? So I agree, but it's an interesting story, and if you take it, even if 50% of it is true, it's kind of interesting. Alex Schambach sends in a member chat and says, I know you've discussed it, but why do you believe Carpenter is so frequently negative when discussing his movies? He is regularly regarded as a goat of the genre, so it always confuses me. Yeah, and I think, again, I think he's regarded as, I would not consider him the greatest of all time as a director in horror. I don't think he is. And I think that is primarily because most of his movies have been failures. Most of his movies have not done well. I'm not saying he's a bad director. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying when you look at his catalog, right, and you look at the movies he's done, I don't know if I would label him as the greatest of all time. This is me because, when you're going to put a label like, I'm not saying you're doing that, but you are right. Generally speaking, he's taught, but it's usually maybe in the Halloween circles. I don't think he's the greatest of all time. I don't think he's the greatest of all time in the genre. I think he is a heavily influential filmmaker in the genre, and I think he's a good horror director. I don't think he's an incredible horror director, like he's like, the Spielberg of horror or something like that, or like the Nolan of, science fiction films or like Kubrick. I mean, I wouldn't put him on that level, but certainly within the horror genre, he's good, and he's he understands horror and what makes good horror good. But most of the horror movies he's done have not done well, and he's been working sort of in that B movies kind of genre, and so it's tricky. Like I would have liked to have seen him expand a bit more. I would have loved to have seen him with bigger budgets, doing more studio pictures, challenging himself a bit more, because he may have become the greatest of all time. I think he is great. I think he's good for sure, but I don't think he's the greatest horror director in the history of cinema. I don't. Not when you have like, you've got Hitchcock up there, you've got Wes Craven up there, you've got what's his face? Oh God, why am I blanking on him? Cronenberg. You've got. I mean, Cronenberg's a bit. You might say something like he's the king. He's the great. He's the king of maybe horror B movies. Maybe, I don't know. But just to label the greatest of all time in horror, not to me. And again, that's not again. I hope we can have a nuanced discussion, right? That's not me saying Carpenter sucks. That's just me saying that I think that's too heavy of a label. But your question was, why do I think he negative when discussing his movies? Because I think Carpenter, when you watch his interviews when he was in his 20s, I think Carpenter, just his natural personality, I think he's just a dick. Now, I don't mean he's a dick, like he's a horrible person. I just think he's one of those guys that can, he shoots from the hip. He likes to be a dick sometimes. He's blunt, and he doesn't care who you are. He's not fazed by who you are. And I think he's just, Like he's kind of got that dicky personality. You know how some people kind of have that dicky, they're not like horrible people. He just kind of has that dicky personality. And when you watch interviews with him, like way back in the 70s and 80s, he's kind of got that air about him. There's kind of something there. And I'm not saying he can't be a lovely man. I'm just saying that he's kind of has a little bit of that. Maybe it's tongue in cheek. Maybe he's being satirical. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like, but he's got that thing about him. And certainly I think he's also jaded. I think he's jaded. I think he, can't stand certain things about Hollywood and the industry. And listen, I don't think he's necessarily negative to every movie. I think he's just, and I say this, and I would put money on it, he's fucking sick and tired of talking about Halloween. And I think he feels there may be, and I don't know this, there may be a little bit of resentment because he's like, I didn't get into making movies to be just known for one fucking movie. I got a whole Rolodex of films. Why aren't you asking me about In the Mouth of Madness? Why aren't you asking me about Village of the Damned? Okay, it sucked. Nobody liked it, but ask me about it. Why aren't you asking me about, I'm not saying he's ever said that. I'm just saying that I think it's Halloween. He's just sick and tired of talking about Halloween, and he's probably sick and tired about talking about himself and his movies because maybe there's some resentment there. Maybe there's some disappointment, I don't know. I'm purely speculating. But certainly when it comes to Halloween, and of course people are going to ask him about Halloween. It was the most successful independent horror movie of all time. It's arguably one of the most successful, largest, greatest slasher franchises in history. He's still reaping the benefits financially from it. So of course he's going to talk about it. But whenever he talks about it now, it's there's like a roll of the eye, and he's like, oh fuck, all right, we're gonna, But he's a crotchety old man now. He's a crotchety old man. He's left the business. He's admitted himself his first love is not movies, it's music. It always has been. And so he made some movies. He tried to make some studio films. It didn't work. He made some B movies. Some were good, some weren't. Some were successful, some weren't. And he left. And now he's making his music, sitting on his ass, playing Xbox, watching basketball, and he's perfectly happy. And but the reason why he's so heavily, again, like, and I talked about this on a show a couple of weeks ago when it was announced he was going to be receiving a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. I said, does he deserve a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame? I said, yes, he does, but not because of his filmography. It's because of his influence, right? Because of Halloween and his influence in a genre, but not necessarily because of his movies in the genre. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't have some bangers in there, like The Thing, or, sure, of course. But I just mean that, I don't think he would make the ballot if it was just purely based on his filmography. It's everything, his music, he came along at the right time when the horror genre was changing, that golden age of slasher. He came in at the right time, and that influenced Halloween, the music, the theme, the Halloween franchise. Yeah, he makes it in because he may not have made another movie in his entire life, and he would make it in. Do you know what I mean? Just based on that, that's enough. He's not making it in because of Village of the Damned. I'm saying making it in like it's a Hall of Fame. But, he's not receiving the star because of Village of the Damned, In the Mouth of Madness, Ghosts of Mars, Vampires, Prince of Darkness, Memoirs of an Invisible Man. He's not getting a star because of that, those films, right? And so, he's largely getting his star. He's largely been approved to get his star because you have to apply. Because when you look at him, you're like, John Carpenter. That is a name that is synonymous with horror. It came along at the right time. He's heavily influential, especially with the music and the synth at that time. He did, the Halloween theme, all the music, Michael Myers, the franchise, John Carpenter. Yes. He's got to be in there. He's got to be in there. And deservedly so, for sure. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I think that he's just disgruntled. He's just tired because when you get known for just one thing and you've talked about it ad nauseum, and he's not the kind of person to necessarily, I mean, he's cordial. I've never met him. I know people who have met him at conventions, and they've always said, he's very cordial, he's polite, he's cool, and that's great. But there's certain interviews where you watch, and there's certain interviews that I've watched where I feel like saying, like, John, like, if you're going to be a dick, if you're going to say things, when the interviewer says, okay, now let's talk about They Live or something. And John Carpenter in the interview goes, oh, thank Christ. All right, fine. Yeah, good. Insinuating that he's glad to be moving on from Halloween or whatever they were talking about before. It's like, why do you have to do that? Like, but that's John Carpenter. And we put up with it because it's John Carpenter. You know what I mean? But if you look at it, would you put up with that from somebody else who wasn't John Carpenter? Like, you're doing an interview, you agree to do the interview, I'm interviewing you, suck it up, and pretend like it's the first time you're talking about it. Because if you don't want to talk about it, then don't agree to the interview. Now, is he paid for his interviews? He might be, right? So maybe that's why he's agreeing to it, right? But I just think, like, yeah, maybe it's the 900th time it's like me on this channel. If you follow me for any length of time, I mean, obviously it's not exactly the same thing, but the principles are the same. You know that I repeat myself a lot. If you follow me for any length of time, you'll know that I will make the same points a lot, but it's not for you. If you've heard me say it, that's great. It's for the new viewers that are tuning in. It's for the people that haven't heard me say it before. I'm not repeating it because I think I forgot I've said it. No, I'm repeating it because I'm repeating it. So it's, you know what I mean? Anyway, I digress. But yeah, I think he's just sick and tired of talking about his movies, quite frankly. It's as simple as that. That's how I feel anyway. All right. Have I missed any super chats? I just want to make sure I haven't missed anything. I don't believe I have. Some member chats. Oh, hang on. I think a new super chat came in here. Did one come in? No, hang on. I'm scrolling back. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yes, Happy Sanjo sends in $5. Thanks, Happy says, I couldn't agree more, but John not being a goat, that was cathartic, excuse me. That's better. I'm looking through here and I'm like, what does that say? Oh, okay, yeah. That was cathartic hearing you say that. I said that before. I've said that before and got eaten alive. Well, that's because, Happy, again, me saying that I don't believe that John Carpenter is the greatest of all time when it comes to horror directors this is the problem with fandom and communication online. And it's rampant like this in politics. It's rampant like this in other areas of life. I'm going to repeat myself here, but it's true. There's no fucking nuance. People are fucking dumb. And I'm saying it bluntly like that to make a point. They don't understand that me saying I don't think John Carpenter is the greatest of all time is not me saying I think he's a piece of shit and he sucks. But that's the world we live in. Do you know what I mean? Am I the greatest voice actor of all time? No. Am I a piece of shit and I suck? No. I mean, why do we have to be on polar opposites of the spectrum? Like, I mean, there's a whole middle here. There's a whole middle. John Carpenter is a great director. John Carpenter is one of the great horror directors. But do I think he stands head and shoulders above Hitchcock, and Cronenberg and Craven? Like, he's the greatest? No, I don't. But that's not me saying that he's shit. But that's what it's like online right now because there's no nuance. You say a movie's an 8 out of 10 and people look at you and go, what the fuck 8 out of 10? So why didn't you like it? What do you mean, why didn't I like it? It's an 8 out of 10. That's how we live. Again, generally speaking, there are wonderful people out there online that do get that. But that's why. That's why. And it's I even dreaded getting online and doing the show about Robert Englund and John Carpenter receiving their stars on the Walk of Fame because I said that I thought to myself, I thought I was going to get reamed because of how nuanced I was going to be. Because I said, listen, Robert Englund, is not getting his star on the Walk of Fame. He's getting a star on the Walk of Fame because of Freddy Krueger. Those are facts. And there's nothing wrong with that. And John Carpenter is getting his star on the Walk of Fame. They're not getting their stars on the Walk of Fame because they're, incredible actors or incredible director, right? And I like to be very nuanced, and people think I'm tearing it down. I think people like to live in a state of just magic. They don't like to live in a state, they don't like the truth to be told to them. They want to believe that Santa is real and fairies are real and the Easter Bunny is knocking on your door and fucking spreading eggs all around. And that's fine. And if you want to do that and if you want to live in that world, that's fine. But I like to break things down because nobody else is fucking talking about it. Nobody else breaks it down like this because I find it's not me tearing it down. It's me giving some insight and nuance as to why are they getting their stars, right? Because some people could say, well, yeah, because Carpenter's the GOAT. And I'm like, is he? Is that why? But that doesn't mean he doesn't deserve it. But people, they can't decipher it because it forces them to think. It forces them to, make, to intellectualize and think about things. And because we live in a world that's very tribal, look at politics. Oh my God. These two sides and teams. Look at sports, there's no you know what I'm saying? It's incredible. So yeah, no, I don't think he's the greatest of all time. I don't think John Carpenter is the greatest horror director of course not. I don't even think he would tell you he's the greatest of all time. But is he a good director? Of course he is. Has he made some really cool movies? Yes, absolutely. Has he made some classics? Of course. Is he heavily influential? Yes. Is he one of the great influential horror directors? For sure. But is he the greatest of all time? I mean, that could be subjective, but I like to try and measure things a bit, right? So what do? We look at his, what can we do, right? Well, we look at his filmography. We look at the success of his films. We look at, the influence of his, that's all we can do, right? And when I look at that, I go, yeah, Halloween is probably arguably the most influential film in his filmography. It's usually the one that is always referred to. Yes, you'll have a director or a filmmaker might say, oh, it was, Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness that really inspired me to make horror movies. Okay, sure. Maybe there's somebody out there that says that, but generally speaking, it's always Halloween, right? And so, beyond Halloween, of course, there's The Thing, Escape from New York, The Fog. Yes, of course. But Halloween, it's Halloween and everything else down here, when you really think about it, in terms of box office at the time, in terms of influence and pop culture zeitgeist, do you know what I mean? It's so above everything else that ultimately at the end of the day, that is what put him over the edge. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's like Robert Englund. Robert Englund is a character actor, right? He's not in there because he's an A-list star. He's in there because he became one of the greatest villains in the history of cinema. That's amazing. That's incredible. And me saying that that's why he's there should not be controversial. That's not me saying, oh, well, calm down. He's not that good. He's only there because of Freddy. No, that's not me saying that at all. I just like to break things down and look, oh, wow, Robert Englund is getting a star. Hey, so why is he getting a star? Let's look at this. Let's talk about this, right? Because why do people get their stars? There's different reasons why. There's a lot of you that didn't even know that, you have to apply to get the star. You have to pay to have it installed. The ceremony's like $75,000 or so. People don't know that. I like those things. I like looking at those things and talking, hey, John Carpenter's getting a star. That's pretty cool. Why? Why is he getting a star? Let's look at maybe why he's getting a star. And you break it down. And people go, oh, you're just being a hater. What do you mean I'm being a hater? What are you talking about? No, you're just obtuse and don't understand. Anyway, I'm done my rant. Thanks, Happy. Yes, John Carpenter is one of the greats. Yes, he is. But do I think he's the greatest of all time? I don't. And that's not me saying he's crap. Stop that, internet. Stop it. Stop it. Let me see here. That's true, Aaron, but B-movie horror was around before Carpenter too. Well, look, most horror movies, actually, if you think about it, a lot of horror movies are B-movie horror. A lot of them are, and Carpenter certainly has some really good ones for sure. And you're right. When you say that at the end of the day it is subjective, yes, you are correct. If you think that he is the greatest of all time, he's the greatest of all time. But when I do these types of shows, or when I try to do these types of shows, I think, is there a way that we could measure this? Like, what could we look at to get a feeling of things, right? So you look at filmography, you look at box office, you look at the influence of each film, and their place in pop culture, right? Their place in the zeitgeist and things like that. And certainly Carpenter has more than just Halloween in there, of course. But those are the only things we can look at if we want to try and instill a certain level of objectivity, right? Otherwise, it is just your opinion. It is just emotional then at that point. And I always try to look at things from as best as I can, from a less, emotional place, and try to look at, could we measure this to some degree, even if it's little, right? And so, so that's, but you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Hang on a sec here. I thought a member chat from LA Cool J sends in a member chat, says, longtime viewer, love the channel, Dave. Thanks, man. If you've touched on this already, I apologize, but thoughts on Blumhouse allegedly remaking Christine. I haven't heard anything about Blumhouse remaking Christine. Look, I whatever your thoughts are on Blumhouse, when I say you, I mean, the collective you, whatever your thoughts are on Blumhouse, and I know they have some misses, I do, and they have some epic failures, some insert the Price is Right theme, not the theme, but the fail theme. Oh, I have that on here. They definitely have had a few of those, for sure, especially over the last little while, but Blumhouse is still, to this day, the leader in horror. And, it's just a byproduct. When you make when you produce and make as many horror films as they do, you are bound to have some stinkers. If A24 and Neon start dishing out horror films like Blumhouse, they will have fucking stinkers as well. It's just the more you produce, the more you churn out, the more stinkers you're going to have. That's just, some are going to hit, some are going to miss, some, you know what I mean? And so, but they are still a force to be reckoned with. They still hold all the cards. They still have a lot of power. And so, they could do Christine right. They could, if they hired the right director, had the right story, for sure. Absolutely. And I think Christine actually might be a good film for them. There's certain films, certain remakes or certain films where I'm like, I don't know if I want Blumhouse on that, because the thing that Blumhouse has done is that you don't have, like, Neon and A24 still have that gritty kind of independent vibe, right? Now, again, when I say independent, I don't mean amateur, obviously. An independent film is a professional movie. Well, it could also be dog shit too, but independent just simply means created and distributed outside of the studio system. And so, Longlegs, for example, is an independent film. And some of these, A24 and Neon are getting their hands on some gritty, that kind of low budget horror, indie kind of vibe, creepy, eerie, like Longlegs, right? And Blumhouse is, they are working the studio system. I mean, their distributor is Universal, right? So they tend to be really, their films look more polished and more, more polished, more what you would expect from more of a kind of predictable paint by numbers kind of thing. And so, but for something like Christine, I'm like, yeah, that would probably fit well with a Blumhouse. You know what I mean? Because now I'm not emotionally attached to Christine. I don't think Christine, like, to make something look polished, Yeah, Christine. Yeah, it's Christine, right? But if Blumhouse says, we're going to be remaking A Nightmare on Elm Street, ooh, that's where I'm like, because I feel that Elm Street should have more of that like long legs feel to it, right? When you watch the movie, that grittiness, that eeriness, that pensiveness, atmosphere kind of stuff. It's not that Blumhouse couldn't churn that out. They could. But because they're churning out so many titles now, and, they've fallen into that sort of, a lot of the films they do are just quite polished. Some are not bad. I mean, I admit, some are pretty good. But some are, not so good. But for a movie like Christine, I don't feel like I want Christine to have that, A24 neon vibe. Like I don't need that with Christine. So if Blumhouse was like, yeah, we're doing Christine, I'm like, oh, okay. That doesn't mean it's going to be good, but it's like, whatever. And maybe it'll be all right. You know what I mean? So I don't care. But listen, people can shit on Blumhouse all they want. They shit on them now. But I'll tell you right now, as a filmmaker myself, if Jason Blum was like, hey man, we think you're talented. We like your stuff. We want to work with you. Let's work together, and we'll find a vehicle for you. We'll find a vehicle for your first feature or something like that. What am I going to say? No? No. Listen, you're Blumhouse, and you churn out stuff like Night Swim and shit. No. Of course, I'm going to be like, yeah. Of course, and anybody would. And because of their reach, their impact, their name in the industry, in horror, and the opportunity. I mean, the opportunity is incredible. If it was right? If the contract was right and the stipulations were correct and everything made sense. Yes, of course. I mean, if it didn't make sense for me as a filmmaker, well then, yeah, of course, that's another thing. But they are still the leaders, man. And for better or worse, they are still the leaders. And, I find that the film industry is very much like sports. All it takes is to get a couple of wins under your belt, and all of a sudden, the fans are like, yeah, we're the greatest team ever. It's like sports, man. It is. If your team, like the Blue Jays, they're having a shitty year. But, if your team loses 5 in a row, fire the coach, fire the general manager, trade this guy, get rid of that. Our team sucks. We're not going to. But if you win 5 in a row, we're amazing. See, I told you. See, that's the right coach. That's the right coach. Awesome general manager. Yeah, all right. Woo. It's like, fuck, It's so stupid at the end of the day. You know what I mean? But I get it. I totally get it. So all Blumhouse has to do is churn out 2 movies that are really good. And all of a sudden it's like, Blumhouse, yeah. It's like, yeah, it's like that. Unfortunately, just because of the volume they're doing, they've just had a couple of stinkers as of late. Apparently, I haven't seen Night Swim. I haven't seen, a couple of the ones that people talk about. But apparently they're not, not that good. So, but hey, Blumhouse, all you got to do, churn out a couple of good ones, and you're back in everybody's good books. So it's kind of the way it goes. Cody Snyder says, Dave, today it doesn't matter if you thoroughly, completely break down what you're saying. People will only see, hear, believe what they want. Oh, it's true. No, it is true. And I've been taken out of context many times. And when I first started doing this, I used to get people not making fun, like in a bad way, but sort of they would notice that I would repeat things a lot, or I would say, like, generally speaking, at the end of the day, things like that. But I did that very, very early on, like when I first started doing this, and I used to say to people, I do that so my words cannot be taken out of context. Or at least I limit that possibility. Because if somebody was to splice, like if somebody that didn't like me watched this show and took a snippet and threw that online and said, see, Dave McCrae is trashing John Carpenter or something, right? I can then defend myself, or somebody else who watches me can come to my aid and be like, you just took like 20 seconds. Hey, here's the other minute. Here's the other minute where he says he's one of the greatest. Right? Here's the other minute where he says he loves John Carpenter, right? So so it's very important to me as, my life on YouTube as a content creator for YouTube, to be very careful with what I say. And I don't always do it, right? Sometimes I have shows where I'm like, that was a really good show. Sometimes I have shows where I'm like, I think I was kind of meandering all over the place there, because I do shoot from the hip. But I always do my best to make sure that I'm careful with how I'm saying things, because I want there to be evidence within the show that says otherwise, somebody that might take me out of context. It still happens, Cody, you're absolutely right. It still happens, and there'll be things I'll read and I'm like, that's not what I meant at all. Like, how do you get that? The mental gymnastics people have to go through. But it's, again, I don't know if it's an age thing, and I don't mean to sound ageist when I say this. I'm 45, so I remember a world where there was no internet and social media and all that kind of stuff. Not that I'm old, but I'm old enough. And so I don't know if it's an age thing, but sometimes I am flabbergasted. Not just at the comments on my channel or to me, but the comments on my fellow content creators on their channels, or a comment I'll see on Twitter or Facebook, and I'll just be like, what? Like, I'm just like, what does that even mean? Like, how could you think that? You know what I mean? And again, but if you grew up in the digital era, and if you grew up with social media, maybe they're younger, maybe they're not being taught how to effectively communicate, or even taught what nuance is. There's probably a lot of people that watch who don't even know what that means. But yeah, so I try to be careful. I try to be very careful, because I want my viewers, I can get made, you repeat yourself, you do this, you do that. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. But you know what? At least it lessens my, the possibility of somebody taking things out of context. So no, I don't think Carpenter's the greatest of all time, the greatest horror director of all time, but I do think he's one of the greats. You know what I mean? And that shouldn't be a controversial opinion, but it is for some people. It is. I do think he's one of the most, I think you could make an argument that he's more likely the most influential horror director of all time. I think there might be a better argument for that than, say, the greatest horror director of all time, because those things can be separate. But it's interesting. It's a good discussion. And at the end of the day, like Aaron said, and like Brandon Collins said as well, like at the end of the day, it will always be like 90% subjective, because it's art, right? It's art. You know what I mean? And so, but the other 10%, you can measure a few things, right? So yeah, like, just everybody calm down. Would I put Carpenter on a Mount Rushmore? I probably would. Yeah, I probably would. All right. Have I got all the super chats, ladies and germs? Member chat from Robert Kitzmiller. Thanks, buddy. Says, I think the Walk of Stars should include movies and characters with the respective names attached below. So Halloween and Freddy Krueger should really get the stars if you think about it. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see what you're saying. You know what? There's a good, I see what you're saying, Robert. And there are some Hollywood stars that do have, like, Bugs Bunny has a star, but then so does Mel Blanc. I think Mel Blanc has a star. Don't quote me on that. But Bugs Bunny does, right? Godzilla has a star. I believe Mickey Mouse has a star, but then so does Walt Disney, I think. So yeah, you could do something like that. It depends on, because of the kind of character that Freddy Krueger is. And I don't think they would put Halloween on there, because once you start doing that, I think you're more likely to get characters rather than you are titles. You could put Freddy Krueger on there, but because of the kind of character he is, maybe not. It might not be approved. But I wouldn't necessarily, because, excuse me, Robert Englund said one time, and he's kind of right. He's kind of right. Because the name Robert Englund outside of the horror community isn't known at all. And that's not a slight or shot to Robert Englund. It's just facts. Robert Englund, for the vast majority of his career, he's been a character actor. and he's been a good character actor, and he's had some really cool and good success. He's had a solid career as a character actor, and he has this one role that is iconic, right? Freddy fucking Krueger. But Robert Englund said something, I forget what interview I saw him on, and I'm going to paraphrase, but he said, again, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, it's not really me that's famous. It's Freddy Krueger that's famous. And he is right. Like, there is truth to that. Now, Robert Englund is absolutely famous and beloved, and he's a legend and an icon in the horror community for sure. Absolutely. And you can make an argument that he's an icon beyond that as well because of the character. But it was so cool to hear him say that, and not a surprise either, because he's been in the business for so many years. He gets it. He understands it. He knows how this works. And to hear him say that was, it was he basically was being humble, and he was saying, listen, like it's not me. At the end of the day, it's not me. And I think it's largely because outside of Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund never had that kind of success ever again. His two biggest successes came in V, and he wasn't even really that, but V and then Elm Street. Outside of that, I know he was an urban legend, and I know he was, but again, he didn't, it's not like he had gone on to be, this like the name Robert Englund became so synonymous. He is anyways, I'm going to go off on another tangent again, but there's a kernel of truth to that. But I think depending on the character, and they do have character names there, Bugs Bunny, as I said, Godzilla, but the names of movies, I don't know. I don't know if I'd put the names of movies. And maybe there is a name of a series there. I'm not sure, but anyway, but yeah, no, I get what you're saying. All right, we'll go another 10 minutes or so, and then I have to skedaddle. Cody Snart says, you missed John's Super Chat. Thank you, Cody. Let me go back and get John's Super Chat. Oh no, Josh's Super Chat. Josh McKenna sends in $9.99. Thank you, Josh. And says, speaking of nuance, do you think social media is a big problem for the lack of context nuance? Well, of course, Josh. Yes, absolutely. I have noticed people screaming about whatever the topic was. Was it this bad before Twitter and X existed? Well, no, because there was no platform. Like, in the 90s, it was all done in person, right? So, and again, I'm not saying that chat rooms or forums didn't exist, in the early 2000s. They did. But social media has just ramped it up from, 10 to 5 trillion. And it has allowed people to remain anonymous and allowed people to get involved as well. I think one of the things that has really affected, I'll just talk about our space here in terms of movies and entertainment, but you can certainly apply this to other areas as well. It has allowed, social media and YouTube and content creation and podcasts. Everybody's got a fucking podcast now. It has allowed people that work in the business and or know a lot about it, have studied it, are inquisitive, insightful, nuanced, and speak really well on the topics, whether that's reviewing a movie or breaking down how some part of the industry works or talking about theories or whatever as it relates. There's a lot of good people that do it well. But because it is so easy to, start up a YouTube channel, get a podcast, you also get the bottom of the barrel that comes through as well. And you get so many people, and because you can remain anonymous, you get so many people talking about things they have no business talking about. And what I mean by that is, talking about things on a level that you just don't understand. You think you might understand because you watch Entertainment Tonight or you watch a movie podcast, but you really don't. It's not. most people really don't understand how it works, and unless you have a reason to. And I'm not saying that they should. It's just there's a lot of people in the space speaking about things they just don't know anything about. And therefore that can cause a lot of, back and forth and a lot of anger and a lot of this. And most people shoot from the hip. Most people don't understand how movies are made. Most people have absolutely and unequivocally no idea how the money is allocated. They do not understand how funds are distributed, how contracts work, how residuals work, how the unions work, how production companies work. Some people don't even know what the difference between a studio and a production company is. They don't, and not to say that they should, but if you're going to speak about it and speak about the business, you got to know what you're talking about. If you're going to start making predictions and start talking about, what's happening at, the studio and this person and that person, you got to know how it works. And there's a lot of people that just don't understand this. And the internet and the ease of access through social media and everything has just made it so easy for everybody to join in, and it's like that with other, the politics and the culture war space and whatever, it's all over the place. And that kind of thing's always existed, but now there's a platform for it. Before it was just your Uncle Bob at the barbecue talking about something he knows nothing about. Now there's a platform for it. There's a forum for it, and it's easily accessible. Now everybody's getting in on the game, and people are, it's remarkable. It really is. And so, back in the 80s and the 90s, it was just, you just talked about it with your friends at school or on the phone or, whatever the case is. But because everybody now is getting in on the game, and because when you're typing something, it's like text messaging, right? When you, how many times, and I've been guilty of it, how many times you've been talking to, your friend or maybe the guy you like or the girl you like or whatever, and they will respond with something. And because it's, unless it has an LOL or a winky face or a ha ha ha, you take it literally. Or how many of us interpret a lowercase okay very differently from an uppercase okay? Or maybe there's no exclamation point at the end of okay. So if you were to text me and I get back to you and you say, hey Dave, how you doing? And I text back, okay. And it's just a lowercase o and a lowercase k, and that is it. How many of us have been like, oh my God, what's wrong? He just typed back, okay. When in reality, I just went, okay. But no, I got to put an exclamation point at the end of that, because it's the exclamation point that communicates to the person I'm texting it to that I'm okay. I'm good. I'm okay. This is, and that is online. And so many of us misinterpret so many things because we project our own idea of tone and intent on what the person is saying. And I've been guilty of it. We all have. Don't pretend you haven't. We've all been guilty of it, right? But I've learned to do my best to kind of not do that. Do you know what I'm saying? But it's very easy. And that didn't exist in the, in the 90s. It didn't exist in the 80s. It didn't exist when I was a teenager, because you would get together with your friends and you would talk about movies when you were in person. And so you could hear their tone. You could see their facial expression. You could get that when you walked into a room and you said, oh, hey, Bruce, what's going on? He goes, okay. It's not, I'm okay. But now that's how we interpret this shit, And so, if you text me and you said, hey, Dave, you saw Long Legs. What'd you think of it? And I said, I thought it was really good. No exclamation point, no nothing. I thought it was really good. There are people that would interpret that as, oh, he just thought it was, it was okay. No, I got to put, I thought it was really good, exclamation point, exclamation point. You know what I mean? And so that's part of the big problem today, is projecting our assumptions on what people are saying to us through, text. And that text is in the chat room here. That text is on Twitter. It's on Facebook. It's on Instagram. It's all over. It's text messaging your buddies. It's on forums. It's Reddit. It's wherever. And it just causes so many people to, they don't understand. And then people are taken out of context, and that's what I mean by there's no nuance. It's wild, man. It's wild, Josh. Yeah, it can be pretty crazy. It can be pretty crazy for sure. for sure. Oh, I picked up the wrong water bottle. Tabitha says the exclamation point is another way of yelling too, so that can be bad as well. Well, it's true, but it would depend on what it's yes, you are right. Well, yeah, that is really what that is ideally what it's supposed to be used for, is, you know, that kind of thing. But of course, language evolves, and we are now in the digital age. So language is evolving online, and we're learning to understand those things. But I think because we're still relatively new in the digital age, you know, again, I mean, it hasn't even been 30 years really. Because we're relatively new in the digital age, we're still working through this, understanding the nuances through text on a screen. But I can tell you, it is that lack of nuance and that projection that we place on other people's intent and tone that causes probably some of the most unnecessary fucking arguments online of all time. I'm telling you, most of the arguments online and oh yeah, could probably be completely eradicated if we just stopped doing that, you know, and not take like, hey, you know, so what'd you think of the movie? I thought it was good. Oh, just good? Not good! Just good, period. Not good, exclamation point. Like, oh, fuck. I thought it was good, okay? It's incredible. There you go. Hell's Dryads got it. Okay. Oh, my goodness. All right, folks, listen. Oh, hang on. Have I got all the super chats? I think I do. Do I have them all? I want to make sure. Yes, a lot of member chats there too. Okay, yes, okay, good. I got him. All right, folks, listen, that's going to do it for me here on this episode of McCrae Live. Thank you to my moderators, of course. Thank you so much. Thank you to the super chat questions that came in. Really appreciate it. Thank you to those member chats as well. If you want to become a member here on the channel, just hit that join button. And for exclusive content, we got a Halloween-only show coming up soon to my level number 2 members. And we've got a member-only Q&A coming up soon as well. And of course, there's always the horror movie nights where we watch classic horror. We just did that. We watched the original Elm Street, which was awesome because, of course, it's the 40th anniversary this year. But yeah, I appreciate you guys as always. Thank you so much. If you're watching after the fact, jump into the comment section. Let me know your thoughts on anything I had to say here today. But more importantly, of course, to the main topic, which of course is Irwin Yablans. Irwin Yablans, the godfather of Halloween, in my opinion, celebrated his 90th birthday yesterday. So big shout out to Irwin. I hope you are safe and healthy and happy. And I hope you celebrated with your family and you had a wonderful time. And thank you for creating Halloween, you know, and giving us a gigantic topic to talk about here. So really awesome stuff. Have a great rest of your weekend, everybody, or a great rest of your Friday, I should say. Happy early weekend, and I will talk to you all very, very soon. All right, folks, in the meantime and in between time, I will talk to you soon. Cheers.